The Galactic Council thought the screaming had broken humanity centuries ago. They were wrong. Far beyond the crowded trade routes of the Orion Expanse, beyond the glowing borders of civilized space where even military patrols feared to travel, a forgotten station drifted beneath the frozen crust of Europa. Its designation had long ago vanished from official records. No beacon marked its location. No maps acknowledged its existence. Yet buried beneath miles of black ice and silent oceans, something ancient still waited. Watching, Europa Station 9 had once been a human research outpost during the final years of the Council Wars, a war so catastrophic that entire star systems had been sterilized into lifeless dust. The station had supposedly died with the rest of humanity's outer colonies when the Council crushed Earth's resistance centuries earlier. That was the story taught across the galaxy. Humanity had screamed, burned, surrendered, and finally faded into irrelevance. At least that was what the Council wanted everyone to believe. Inside the Grand Council chamber orbiting the capital world of Therion Prime, silence ruled like law itself. Towering alien delegates sat beneath rings of cold blue light, their enormous holographic banners floating above polished obsidian floors. Ancient species that had survived the birth of empires watched the chamber with emotionless eyes. Mechanical translators whispered in thousands of languages simultaneously, creating a low metallic hum that never truly stopped. Then every screen in the chamber flickered once, twice, and died. A wave of confusion swept through the delegates. Security drones activated instantly, their red optics scanning the hall while emergency systems struggled to reboot. The Council's central AI, an intelligence older than most civilizations present, failed without explanation. That had never happened before. A deep vibration suddenly rolled through the chamber floor. Not mechanical, almost alive. Several delegates rose from their seats in alarm as static consumed the massive central display. The noise sharpened into violent distortion, like a transmission clawing its way through centuries of silence. Some covered their auditory receptors. Others stared in frozen disbelief. And then the signal appeared. A single line of crimson text burned across the darkness. Final human evaluation commencing. The chamber temperature seemed to drop instantly. No one spoke. No one moved, because every elder species in that room recognized the phrase. The Veil Ambassador, the oldest living member of the Council, felt something he had not experienced in over 400 years. Fear. His pale hands trembled against the edge of his throne as memories flooded back uninvited. Human warships emerging from burning nebulas. Distress signals drowned beneath screams. Entire fleets disappearing without debris. He remembered planets that had vanished overnight after threatening Earth during the ancient wars. And worst of all, he remembered the last transmission humanity ever sent before retreating into silence. You mistook our patience for surrender. The static intensified. Somewhere deep within the signal came distant sounds. Faint metallic footsteps echoing through corridors. Warning sirens buried under layers of interference, and human voices speaking too quietly to understand. Europa Station 9 was alive. Impossible. The Council had personally verified its destruction centuries ago. Yet the signal continued broadcasting across every known system in the galaxy, overriding military frequencies, civilian networks, even encrypted government channels. Entire worlds stopped functioning as billions watched the crimson warning spread across their skies. On countless planets, ancient veterans who had once fought humanity went pale the moment they saw the message. Because legends never truly die, sometimes they wait. And beneath the frozen oceans of Europa, something had finally awakened. Commander Elias Ward stood alone on the observation deck of the battleship Vigilance, and even the silence around him felt engineered, too precise, too controlled, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Beyond the reinforced panoramic glass, space stretched like a wound that refused to close. The shattered remains of Saturn's old defense ring drifted in slow, ghost-like arcs. Massive fragments of once impenetrable human fortifications now reduced to silent monuments. Titanium plates the size of cities rotated lazily, catching distant sunlight in fractured flashes that looked almost like dying memories. No alarms echoed here anymore. No battle chatter. Only the soft hum of life support systems and the faint vibration of a ship built for a war the galaxy thought humanity had lost. But Earth had not fallen. It had simply disappeared from sight. The Galactic Council had declared humanity contained decades ago, politically restrained, economically isolated, technologically monitored. Trade embargoes had strangled the outer colonies. Diplomatic channels had been severed. Even allied systems had been forced to distance themselves under council pressure. Humanity, once loud among the stars, had been pushed into a quiet corner of existence. And yet they were still here, still breathing, still watching. Elias's gaze shifted across the void where Earth should have been visible, though distance and stealth shielding hid it behind layers of defensive distortion fields. Somewhere behind that invisible veil, humanity's cradle turned slowly, wrapped in silence so complete it bordered on defiance. He reached up without thinking, fingers brushing the worn metal tag hanging beneath his uniform. It was scratched, faded, almost unreadable now, but the engraved name was still there. His father's name? A relic from the Council Wars, when ships like this were not relics but weapons of survival. Elias remembered fragments of stories, brief flashes told by veterans who spoke only when they thought no one was listening. Battles where human fleets fought without reinforcements. Colonies that vanished overnight under Council pacification strikes. Entire generations raised in the shadow of extinction. And yet humanity endured, not by strength alone, by adaptation. A soft chime broke the stillness. Elias turned instantly. The bridge console behind him flickered alive, bathing the darkened deck in cold blue light. The ship's AI, calm and emotionless, spoke with unnatural precision. Commander Ward, long-range detection arrays confirm multiple FTL disturbances at Sol system perimeter. A pause. Then the words that tightened every muscle in his body. Council fleet signatures identified. Estimated strength. Overwhelming. Elias exhaled slowly as if the air itself had become heavier. So it had begun. He stepped closer to the console, watching as the tactical hologram unfolded. A blooming sphere of red markers surrounding the solar boundary like a tightening net. Thousands of council vessels. Not scouts. Not diplomats. This was formation deployment. This was judgment. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Older than his years, hardened by years of silent preparation for a moment he was never supposed to face. Time, he murmured, almost to himself. The AI responded without hesitation. Human contingency protocols are active across all dormant installations. That was the only reassurance humanity had left. Not alliances. Not mercy. Only preparation buried so deep no enemy had ever confirmed its existence. Elias tightened his grip on the railing, feeling the ship subtly shift beneath him as vigilance began routing power through its hidden systems. Somewhere far below the observation deck, engines that had never been activated in recorded history began to awaken, quietly, patiently, like something remembering what it was built to do. Outside, the ruins of Saturn's ring continued to drift in endless broken silence. But now, even silence felt temporary, because the galaxy had finally come to knock on Earth's door, and humanity was no longer pretending to be asleep. The Council arrived with overwhelming force. It did not begin with warning. It began with absence. Across the edge of the solar perimeter, space itself seemed to stutter, as if reality hesitated before allowing what came next to exist. Then the first wave of FTL ruptures tore open the darkness like glowing scars, each one vomiting forth a capital warship from the Galactic Council's armadas. Hulls the size of continents slid into normal space in perfect formation, their arrival so synchronized it felt rehearsed by something that had never known doubt. 10,000 vessels, and still more arriving behind them. The sky above the outer planets filled so quickly that starlight vanished, swallowed beneath layers of engineered metal and energy shielding. Jupiter's orbit was no longer visible. Saturn's broken ring disappeared under a shifting canopy of war. Even the distant Kuiper belt blinked out, replaced by the cold geometry of military dominance. On Earth, night turned into false day. Massive alien dreadnoughts positioned themselves with surgical precision, each one locking gravitational targeting systems onto planetary coordinates below. Orbital weapon platforms unfolded like mechanical flowers of judgment, their cores glowing with restrained catastrophe. Entire fleets adjusted their formation silently, as if even sound would be unnecessary for what was about to happen. Inside underground shelters across Earth's surface, alarms did not scream. They whispered. A low-frequency pulse carried through bedrock and reinforced steel, vibrating in human bones more than air. Children instinctively clung to parents they could barely see in emergency lighting. Old veterans of forgotten wars sat motionless, staring at ceiling monitors that showed nothing but the encroaching void above. The Council's demand arrived through every remaining channel at once. Not a message. A command embedded into every communication system, every satellite relay, every buried emergency antenna humanity had hidden from its own oppressors. Compliance protocols, biological oversight, military disarmament, cognitive governance by Council-appointed AI arbiters. The language was clinical, clean, almost polite. But beneath it, the meaning was absolute. Surrender your future, or be removed from it. In orbit, Commander Elias Ward watched the holographic battlefield bloom into existence like a nightmare-given structure. Red markers surrounded Earth completely now. No gaps, no escape corridors, no diplomatic ambiguity. Just containment geometry, a cage drawn in the mathematics of annihilation. His hands remained steady, but something in his chest tightened as he read the final line of the Council transmission repeating across the tactical display. Final compliance window, open. A timer began counting down, not toward negotiation, toward erasure. For a brief moment, Elias allowed himself to imagine what the Council saw when they looked at Earth. A weakened species, fragmented colonies, a civilization forced into silence after centuries of suppression. A relic world waiting to be restructured into something safe. They were wrong, but proving it would cost everything. The ship around him hummed louder now, systems awakening layer by layer beneath decks that had never seen combat activation. Far below, sealed compartments unlocked with mechanical precision older than most Council species' recorded histories. Power signatures that should not exist began rising from dormant cores hidden in the Vigilance's structure. Elias exhaled once. Slow, controlled. Because the galaxy was not here to negotiate. It was here to test humanity. And tests, as history had taught them, were never survived by those who failed to answer correctly. The Council arrived with overwhelming force. But what came next was not escalation. It was realization. At first it began as a failure, small, almost dismissible. A single Council dreadnought lost sensor synchronization for 0.3 seconds. Then a second vessel reported gravitational mapping inconsistencies near the asteroid belt. Within moments, entire fleets began recalibrating targeting systems that suddenly refused to agree with each other. Something was wrong, and then the truth surfaced like a blade dragged through darkness. Deep within the Council's central command network aboard the command arc of Varelian Spire, ancient archival protocols began unlocking themselves without authorization. Security algorithms failed to stop them. Quantum locks collapsed as if they had never existed. One by one, sealed records long classified under pre-Council anomaly threat level Omega were forced open. What emerged was not data. It was history. A history the Council had spent eons suppressing. Humanity was never the first intelligent species to rise in the Sol Systems region. It was not even the second. Long before the Council existed, before interstellar law, before diplomacy itself had meaning, there had been something else. An era of expansion so violent that entire star clusters were rewritten into silence. And at the center of that forgotten age was Earth, not as a cradle of innocence, but as a sealed origin point. The records revealed ships older than Council civilization itself, drifting in black voids with no identifiable design origin. Weapons that did not register on modern physics models. Communication logs written in fragmented human language variations that predated standardized linguistics. Every recovered fragment told the same impossible conclusion. Humanity had been here before, and had been deliberately erased from galactic memory. Inside the command chamber, Council Admiral Zetheris felt his neural interface stutter as forbidden visualizations forced themselves into his perception. He saw fleets, not Council fleets, not alien armadas, but human constructs moving through space with terrifying coordination. Not random expansion, not survival, containment, correction, judgment. The records describe something the Council had never been meant to rediscover. Humanity was not a conquered species. It was a restricted one. A civilization so volatile in its historical evolution that precursor civilizations had agreed on a singular solution: suppression across time, memory, and interstellar awareness. Entire species had been erased not for opposing humanity, but for failing to control what humanity became when provoked. The word test appeared again and again in the recovered archives. not as evaluation, but as containment verification. On the battlefield surrounding Earth, Council fleets began to hesitate, not tactically but instinctively. Commanders who had faced supernova warfare and dimensional collapse scenarios found themselves unable to justify forward engagement orders. Their weapons remained armed. Their shields remained active. But their certainty was gone. And in war, certainty was everything. A fragmented transmission broke through the Council command net. Unstable, distorted, originating from an encrypted human frequency buried beneath decades of interference suppression. It was not a threat. It was not negotiation. It was recognition. A single sentence spoken in calm human tone echoed across every Council ship simultaneously. You were never sent here to judge us. A pause. Static swallowed the line. Then the final fragment arrived, colder than vacuum space. You were sent here to see if you still could. The Council armadas froze across the solar system, not because they were attacked, but because for the first time in recorded galactic history, they understood something far more dangerous than any weapon humanity had ever built. They were not the observers of the test. They were the subjects of it. I have a 6. Humanity did not respond immediately, and that silence was the most terrifying thing the galaxy had ever heard. Across the solar system, every Council fleet remained locked in formation, weapons still aimed, shields still humming, but nothing moved. No advance orders, no diplomatic correction protocols, no follow-up demands. The machines of conquest waited for commands that no longer felt justified. Then Earth answered, not with words at first, with absence. Every Council sensor array suddenly went blind to low-orbit space above Earth. Star trackers failed. Quantum relays returned impossible readings like the planet itself had stopped agreeing with reality. For a split second, it felt as if Earth had simply been removed from the universe and placed somewhere else entirely. Then the structures revealed themselves, not emerging from Earth, from beneath it. From hidden orbital shadows, lunar crust vaults, asteroid disguises, and gravitational blind spots that had existed for centuries without detection, massive human fleets began to unfold, not newly built, not hastily assembled, waiting. Ancient human warships, some marked with faded insignias from eras the galaxy had never officially recorded, slipped into visible space like waking predators. Their hulls carried scars older than the Council itself. Their designs did not follow modern galactic engineering logic. They followed something else: survival mathematics. Across tactical displays aboard Council vessels, emergency threat classifiers screamed contradictions. These ships should not exist. Their energy signatures should not be stable. Their propulsion systems violated known physics by simply refusing to fail under analysis. And yet they were real. Inside the bridge of the human flagship Vigilance, Commander Elias Ward stood motionless as the ship's dormant systems completed full activation. The vessel's core, sealed behind layers of military restriction protocols older than most civilizations, came alive with a low, resonant hum that felt less like machinery and more like a memory returning to consciousness. All across human-controlled space, similar awakenings occurred. Hidden fleets rose from silence. Defense platforms unfolded from debris fields. Orbital weapons that had never been officially acknowledged shifted into firing readiness without hesitation. No one panicked, because every human crew member had been waiting for this exact moment their entire lives. On every human vessel, the same encrypted transmission loop activated automatically, an ancient doctrine encoded into command structure itself. Do not escalate unless Earth is breached. And now Earth was surrounded. So escalation was no longer a choice. In the Council armada, panic spread unevenly, like fire finding oxygen in different pockets of a dying structure. Some commanders attempted withdrawal calculations. Others tried to re-establish diplomatic channels. A few prepared preemptive strikes, but none of them could ignore what was forming in the darkness around them. Human ships were not surrounding the Council fleet. They were boxing it in, not aggressively, systematically, with mathematical precision that suggested centuries of preparation for exactly this configuration. Elias finally spoke, his voice calm, almost tired, but carrying something heavier than authority. Lock all systems to defensive posture, he ordered. A pause, then quieter. They came to test us, so let them learn what we prepared for. Far beyond the battlefield, Earth's hidden uplinks synchronized. A final human broadcast activated across all Council channels simultaneously. Not as a warning, not as a threat, but as confirmation. The galaxy heard it clearly. Humanity is no longer under evaluation. A brief silence followed. Then the final line arrived, sharp enough to fracture certainty itself. The evaluator has arrived. And for the first time since the Council's founding, the hunters stopped feeling like hunters. Days later, the battlefield no longer looked like war. It looked like aftermath trying to remember what conflict used to be. The shattered remains of Council armadas drifted across the Sol system in slow, silent arcs. Massive hull fragments rotated lazily through starlight, their once imposing silhouettes now reduced to hollow monuments of arrogance. Some ships still flickered with dying power cores, pulsing weakly like wounded hearts refusing to accept death. Others were already cold. Metal graves floating through an empire that no longer had authority over anything, even its own ruins. Earth remained untouched, not because it was spared, because it was respected in the only language the galaxy had finally learned to understand. Commander Elias Ward stood on the observation deck of the Vigilance, watching debris fields drift like broken memories across space. The bridge behind him was unusually quiet, not the silence of fear anymore, but the silence of recalibration. Systems were being shut down, weapons locked into safeties. Entire fleets were transitioning from war posture to something no Council doctrine had ever prepared for. Survival without dominance. Far below, Earth rotated slowly beneath its protective veil of silent orbital platforms. No celebration fires burned in its skies. No victory broadcasts echoed across networks. Humanity did not cheer when the last Council command signal collapsed into static. Instead, they watched. They remembered. Because victory for them was never something to be enjoyed. It was something to be endured. A fractured transmission still lingered across residual channels, the final fragmented communication from surviving Council vessels. No threats remained in it now. No demands. Only confusion. Only disbelief. Only the quiet unraveling of civilizations that had assumed they were eternal. They did not escalate, one voice whispered across fading static. They ended it. Elias exhaled slowly, hands resting on the cold railing of the observation deck. His reflection in the glass looked distant, less like a commander, more like someone carrying the weight of a decision the galaxy would never fully understand. Behind him, the Vigilance AI spoke softly. Residual hostile signatures 0. Galactic threat status terminated, a pause. Then almost uncertainly, primary human directive? Awaiting confirmation. Elias did not answer immediately, because humanity had no victory protocol for this moment. No doctrine for what came after being feared instead of hunted. No strategy for a galaxy suddenly too afraid to move. He looked out at the stars, at the fractured empire that had tried to measure humanity and instead discovered something it could not categorize. Not peacekeepers, not conquerors, not even survivors. Something older, something patient, something that only revealed itself when pushed too far. Finally, Elias spoke. Not to the ship, not to the Council remnants, but to every listening frequency still trembling across space. Stand down all offensive systems, he said quietly. All fleets return to shadow protocols. We are done being tested. A pause stretched across the void as if the galaxy itself was listening for contradiction. There was none. The human fleets obeyed instantly, not in triumph, in relief, and somewhere beyond the shattered Council lines. Surviving alien observers recorded the only conclusion that mattered now, etched into every military archive, every diplomatic record, every terrified historical log. Humanity had not been unleashed. It had simply stopped pretending restraint was weakness. As Earth's orbit stabilized and the last fragments of war drifted into darkness, a final broadcast echoed once across the remaining galactic network, not as a warning this time, but as a fact that would outlive every civilization that heard it. The test is over. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy finally understood. It was never humanity that needed to be evaluated. It was everything else.